Hi, Rosa from School of Hard Knocks in Scotland here, and I'm going to talk to you today about anxiety, and particularly about obsessive anxious thoughts that revisit us and things that we can do to try and deal with them and minimise the amount of discomfort or anxiety that we experience when we have these thoughts. So what is anxiety? Anxiety is a feeling. It's a persistent feeling of worry, fear, or nervousness. It's actually a very natural human response to danger, or importantly, to perceived danger. And what are the symptoms of anxiety? Well, all of us will have experienced these symptoms at some point in our life, and they can include sweating, shaking, they can include breathlessness, dry mouth, feeling like you can't swallow is quite a common one. A feeling of dissociation, which means an out-of-body experience, so you almost feel like you're looking down on yourself. Your heartbeat can get faster, you can have palpitations with that, and you can feel dizzy or start shaking. So these are all symptoms of anxiety. Some people just experience anxiety occasionally at a time when they are in danger or at risk. Some people experience anxiety in a much more intense way and for much longer, prolonged periods of time. You will have heard of the fight or flight response. This is what happens to our body when we are physically or mentally terrified. It's a physiological response triggered by the release of hormones through our body, and these hormones prepare our body to either stay where we are, fight, solve the problem that we find ourselves in, or they prepare us to run away from the perceived problem. The term fight or flight comes from our ancient ancestors, and it refers to the choice that they would have had. So imagine a caveman who is presented with a bear or other wild animal. They either need to fight it or they need to run as fast as they can to get away from that danger. So what happens is our body releases adrenaline, our heart starts beating faster, and that's because our body is preparing, it's putting all of its energy, it's getting more oxygen in, increasing the blood flow so that we can run as fast as we can or fight as hard as we can. So blood flow is redirected, our body becomes tense, we're ready for action. This is a really useful response if we are in a situation where we need to fight or flight. So for example, if we find ourselves presented with a fire, we might decide, this is a small fire, I can handle it, I'm going to go fill up buckets of water and I'm going to put it out. Our body's ready to do that. We've got all of this adrenaline surging, we can do that quickly. Or we might decide, this fire is huge, I need to get out of here, and we can run out as fast as we can. When this threat is just in our head, and this response is caused by very anxious thinking rather than by something actually in front of us, this physiological response can be quite unhelpful. Having all of these fight or flight symptoms can make it difficult to get on with our normal day when we're just having them with response to an anxious thought in our head. What kind of anxious thoughts might we be having? Well, generally common ones can consist of thoughts about regret, having maybe said something that we think has offended somebody, maybe done something that we wish we hadn't done. Those ones often haunt us in the dead of night. At the moment, a big one is obviously going to be the COVID-19 crisis. Are we going to get the illness ourselves? Is somebody in our family going to get it? Now, it's natural to worry about that, but it's not helpful to obsessively worry about it, and it's not helpful to get really anxious about it. So what can we do about thoughts that keep revisiting us in our head? Well, you would think that what we should do is suppress those thoughts, is to try and ignore them, get rid of them, put those thoughts aside, run away from them, do everything we can to avoid those thoughts. But I'm going to tell you now about white bears and why white bears have taught us that suppressing thoughts is not the answer. Okay, here's a challenge for you. Don't think about a white bear. Think about whatever you want, but do not think about a white bear. Please don't think about a white bear. Do not think about a white bear. Now that I've said that, it's going to make it a lot harder for you to not think about a white bear. This was an experiment that started in the 80s by a psychologist called Dr. Wegener and has been repeated in different guises over the years, where a psychologist will bring groups of people together. One group they will ask not to think about a white bear, and one group they will say, think about whatever you want, including a white bear. Now what will happen is both groups will think about white bears, particularly those that you have asked not to. Later in the day, they'll find, when they ask those people to record their thoughts, that those people who have suppressed the thought about white bears will think about them much, much, much more later on in the day. So thought suppression creates a rebound effect, where when you are allowed to think about that thought, you think about it tenfold. It keeps coming back to you. Why do you think about it when you're trying not to? Well, think about your brain being split in two parts. You've got your conscious brain and you've got your subconscious brain. If you ask your conscious brain not to think about something, it goes, okay, fine, I'm not going to think about it, I'll distract myself. Oh, can I hear birds singing? What will I have for my dinner? I wonder what's going to happen in the football tonight. Your conscious brain is able to distract itself. Meanwhile, your subconscious brain keeps reminding your conscious brain why it's distracting itself. So your subconscious brain is going, hey, remember and distract yourself because of the white bear, we can't think about it. So your conscious brain is able to keep distracting itself, but it will be consistently reminded by the subconscious brain as to why it is doing that. Again, the big problem afterwards is the rebound effect when you do allow yourself to think about the subject. Similar experiments have been done with subjects that might be deemed more useful than white bears, such as smoking cigarettes and dieting. And they found that when people really forced themselves not to think about cigarettes, smokers that is, when they stopped forcing themselves not to think about it, they smoked much more. Similarly, people who were on really conscious diets, thinking a lot about not eating chocolate, for example, when presented with chocolate, would eat more of it than those who had not been asked not to think about chocolate. So thought suppression is ineffective. It's not what we need to do. What can we do then when these thoughts pop into our head? Well, rather than avoid them, we acknowledge them. So if an anxious thought comes into our head, perhaps about a family member getting coronavirus, rather than thinking, no, pushing it out as hard as we can, we think, okay, I'm having an anxious thought about somebody getting coronavirus. I've got that thought, I'm not going to push it away, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. Now this can be easier said than done, particularly when these thoughts can cause us a lot of anxiety, but anxiety is an emotion, it's something that we feel, and all emotions will ultimately pass, so you've just got to sit it out, and I promise you it will pass. You can distract yourself a bit. As long as you're not forcing that thought away, you're keeping that thought there, you can do something mindful, like drawing, for example, or reading a book. You can go and speak to somebody else who's in your house. If there's nobody there, you can pick up the phone and chat to somebody. So you can change your thought cycle, which will distract you a bit from that thought. And when you come back to it, it's gone. You can save thoughts for later. So sometimes, rather than push it out of your brain, you think, now it's not a good time to have that thought. What I will do is I'll acknowledge it, I won't push it away, I'll write it down and I'll come back to it in an hour. That way you're saying this thought is allowed, it can be here, I'm not suppressing it, but I'm going to come back to it later and give it my full attention then. I find that's really effective at night time. If you're in your bed and you start having a really anxious thought, maybe midnight, and it's struggling to get to sleep, have a little notebook by your bed. Write that thought down and tell yourself, it's okay, I won't forget, I am saying that this thought is valid, but I'm going to deal with it in the morning. Write it down, close the notebook, and that for me helps me get to sleep. A really good thing that we can do to manage our thoughts, not suppress them, but see them and accept them a bit better, is to practice mindfulness and meditation. There are other videos on this site that will show you ways of doing that, but mindfulness and meditation are things that you need to practice. Your brain is a muscle, and so you can exercise it and get it to work better in certain ways. And there's loads of evidence that mindfulness and meditation are great ways of being able to have a little bit more control over your thoughts and your reaction to them. The most effective thing that you can do to try and deal with your anxious thoughts is do nothing. Stop fighting them. Now that sounds defeatist, but it's actually not, and sometimes it's a harder and braver thing to do. I was once given an analogy of a Chinese finger trap, and if you know what that is, it's a little toy. You put your 2 fingers into it like this, and then when you try and pull them out, they get stuck. And the harder you pull your fingers, the harder they are stuck in there, and you literally can't get them out. And then somebody will kindly tell you the trick to removing your fingers, and it's that you relax into it, and you push them forwards, it loosens, and you're able to pull them back out again. And your anxious thoughts can be a bit like that as well. The harder you try and get rid of them, the harder you try, the more they're going to try and stay there, the more they're going to remind you of what they're doing there. The harder you push against your anxious thoughts, the harder they are going to push against you in return. So if you accept your anxious thoughts and you allow them to be there, if you are somehow able to relax into them a bit, the sooner they will pass and they will be over. They might come back, but the experience will get shorter and shorter and be less intense, and you'll have less of those physical symptoms of anxiety. Another analogy that I was once given was, imagine you're sitting on the banks of a river and you're watching this river flow past you. And on this river, there are some beautiful things like water lilies. You can see some beautiful fish all swimming down. So down they go, downstream. And then you start seeing some horrible things in that river. You see some old shopping trolleys. You see a book. You see crisp packets. You see lots of rubbish going along that river, and you think, that's ruining all the nice things in the river. What am I going to do? I'm going to jump in and I'm going to pull those things out. But if you jump in to pull those things out of the river, the water will go over you. You'll be in that river and suddenly you're flowing down with all of the rubbish. You're submerged and it's hard to fight against it. Even if you did manage to pull those things out of the river and sit back down, more rubbish is going to come back down that river again, along with the beautiful things like fish and water lilies. So what you must do is sit on the bank of the river, watch the good and the bad go past you, and not try and fight it. Don't jump into the river, just accept everything that's going past you. And that really helped me. I hope some of these tricks have helped you today, or helped you think a bit differently about your anxious thoughts and about the response that you have to them. So the best thing you can do, to recap, is to accept anxious thoughts and know that they will pass, as all emotions do.